camera swung to look at the manager. They cut up the manager. I faded him up, a bit more shouting. And the director leant forward in his little area and he looked through the window at me and he said, "Bill, be careful of him." And I looked through and I went, "Okay." Next time, oops, he let forth a stream of what we shouldn't have heard. And the director leant forward again. He looked through the window to him and he went, "That's how you learn."
Okay, so today I'm joined with Bill Whiston. I have the pleasure of speaking to him. Bill, who has over 47 years experience in sound mixing, sound recording for live broadcasts, for scripted, documentary, news, music as well, a wealth of experience. Thank you very much for joining me, Bill. Pleasure to be speaking to you again. And just as a brief segue, again, I laugh at having spoken to you for the first time whenever I, years ago, spoke to you. And I think we just met. And it was literally the very next week that I walked into Formula One. No clue, because I've been talking to Richard online and planning to meet up with Richard. Spent probably 3 or 4 hours with Richard. And it finally clicked as we were walking down the stairs for me to leave Formula One. And I'm like, "Richard Whiston, you don't happen to know Bill?" He's like, "Yeah, it's my dad." And the whole time, like, coincidence, meeting the father and son duo in the same kind of week in different areas and never knowing. So with that, just give you a chance to introduce yourself, Bill. Kind of give us a bit of your overview, your background, your sound recording and mixing kind of experience, and then I'll ask you just to hold off on telling me how you got into audio for me to
Okay.
to set you off on that path.
Well, I was born in Kenya and lived in Nairobi until I was 19 and came away with very poor A levels. That was all down to girls and guitars at the time. And ended up in London, staying with family. Went through 2 families, and it was decided that I ought to perhaps get a bedsit so I could stay in by myself and behave. And so that happened, and I worked for 2 jobs before I actually joined up with the Beeb. The first one was the North Thames Gas Board, and the second one was with the Westminster Bank before it became NatWest. In fact, it became NatWest when I was there, so I was all part of that transition. And the way I got into the BBC, a school friend of mine that I used to go and visit, I used to go and visit his parents who lived down in Berkshire somewhere at weekends. Because I knew him at school in Nairobi and had a good relationship with the family, they used to invite me down and used to feed me up and do my washing for me. And he got a job at the Beeb as a camera assistant, and he used to get me tickets for shows, and I just used to sit in these studios watching what was going on, going, "Oh, this is what I want to do." I used to moan to his mother that Graham had a wonderful job and I'd love that job and I don't know how to. She said, "Oh, for goodness sakes, stop your moaning. You write a letter to the Beeb. I'll type it out for you. You send it off. We'll see what happens." So okay, well, I'll do that then. And so we sent off the letter, And 3 months went by, never heard anything. And then suddenly I got a letter saying, Mr. Whiston, you will present yourself to an interview in the centre of London somewhere. Oh, gosh, okay. So I turned up. And one bit of advice I was given by Graham was, you have to know a bit of algebra because they'll ask you your quadratic equation just to check that you've done A-levels. And sure enough, they did. They got that right. And I left thinking, oh, well, that went well. And another 3 months went by and I didn't hear anything. I thought, oh, well, that's it. Never going to happen. And I then got a letter saying, Mr. Whiston, you will present yourself at the BBC training school in Wood Norton on the 2nd of September, 1970. And I went, that's a month away, and I'm working at the bank, and I've got to give them a month's notice. Oh God. So it all went a bit haywire. But anyway, I went to Wood Norton and did my training and ended up in Television Centre with one of the crews there who were doing Top of the Pops at the time. So that was absolute heaven as far as I was concerned, because I was very much into guitar and stuff like that, singing. So it went on from there, basically. How I got into outside broadcasts, in 1976, they were looking for people from Television Centre to go over to do 3 months attachment to outside broadcasts, to do fairway walking for golf and stuff like that, and working behind the scenes in Wimbledon and all that sort of stuff. So I did that, and I was quite impressed with it. And the 3 months attachment actually lasted 6 months. And then I went back to Telecentre, and I had enjoyed myself so much that I went to my boss at Telecentre and said, can I go back again? And he said, well, no, you've had your turn. There's other people who would like to go. And about a month before the attachments came up again, he called me and he said, yeah, you're going to outside broadcast. They'd like you back. So I went back, and that lasted 8 months. So that was rather nice. Then the following year, 2 jobs came up at outside broadcasts, and I was lucky enough to get one of them. And it went on from there, basically. And I was with them for rather a long time, until somebody at the Beeb decided they didn't want an outside broadcast organisation anymore and got rid of us, which is a shame.
Yeah. So over that course of time, what types of activities or events and outside broadcast have you been part of recording or part of setting up?
Well, basically, when you go to outside broadcast as a sort of newbie, you join a scanner, as we call them, the trucks that go around with the cameras and audio equipment in. And you work with a sound guy who's in charge of the scanner, and you run around and rig microphones and look after presenters and all that sort of stuff. On my first attachment, I was given the job at Wimbledon to look after the guy who did all the presentation. There's a lovely guy called Harry Carpenter. And I got on really well with him, and it was good fun. Just, when he had to be in shot, I put his microphone on, stuck his deaf aid in his ear, and generally looked after him. And that was sort of pretty much what I did when I actually joined for real. But there was a bit more to it, obviously. More rigging, all sorts of different shows, and it went on from there. And eventually, I got to do a bit more training, if you like. And I didn't go through the middle process of being the guy who ran the scanner. Very briefly, I ran the music truck, but somehow missed the middle bit and became a sound supervisor instead. So did a bit of a leapfrog there. And that was in 1984. In my time on the scanner, I did a lot of Wimbledon stuff. In fact, I worked every year at Wimbledon from 76 all the way through to 2013, apart from 1 year when I was sent off to China to do the Hong Kong transfer from the UK to China. And that's the only year I ever missed Wimbledon. So it's sort of my home.
Well, and
in a way.
Since you kind of brought Wimbledon up, I know previously we had talked about some interesting times at Wimbledon. So one in particular was a certain, dare I say, American tennis star who did not necessarily agree with a call. Can you kind of explain that situation and how that occurred? And for anyone who's not personally familiar with Bill, I'll just say you have this slightly, as I call it, rebellious, innovative side to you when it comes to audio, of pushing doors and see which ones open. So please, if you don't mind, can you set that scene and explain what happened that day?
Yeah. Dear old John McEnroe was playing, I think it was Gullickson, in court 1, number 1 court in Wimbledon. I was still a junior on the scanner, but the gentleman who was mixing number 1 court that day decided he'd like to go off and have a tea and bun somewhere. And he left me mixing the match. And dear John served an ace, basically. And the umpire called it out. Now, Gullickson had already started to move the far end as though the shot was in. It hit the line. McEnroe was totally convinced it had hit the line, but the umpire called it out. And John looked at the guy and said, "I beg your pardon," and started to move towards him. And normally in those situations, we were supposed to fade away the microphones on the chair, which got most of the action, to the crowd mics up in above the crowd, so that you didn't hear the dispute being discussed. That was the rule. But I thought, this is interesting. I didn't know how interesting it was going to be, but I just felt it was probably. Anyway, what happened. You cannot be serious and all that stuff. And well, it was interesting. We completed the match eventually. McEnroe won, in spite of being docked a point. And when it had finished, the guy that had gone away for a cup of tea came in and he said, "What's been going on? There seems to be been a bit of a fuss on number 1 court. What happened?" So I told him, and he said, "You didn't, did you? Oh, you're going to be in real trouble." And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to be in trouble. I never was, because it appeared the production thought it was quite good. And not only that, but the two commentators on it actually agreed that John's shot had been in. One of them just said, "It's a real shame that he goes on about it a bit."
So you essentially set a slightly new precedent as to what gets faded up and down when it comes to Wimbledon from that point on.
I'm afraid so. Yes.
Yeah. And having lived in the UK, there's a sense of decorum that's normally put forward
Yeah.
where
Well, they have Hawkeye now, so any disputes like that are resolved in a much different way.
No
But it
conversation.
is an interesting moment.
Yeah. I to dig deeper into your Wimbledon experience. So you've had what did we look at? 37 years experience doing Wimbledon. I'm sure there's lots of challenges with presenting or mixing sound for something like that. When you talk hard surfaces, you talk echoes. Can you kind of walk through some of the challenges that you had to deal with when dealing with audio for Wimbledon?
Wimbledon, I did centre court most of the time that I was there. I started off in the outside courts mixing area, which covered number 2, number 3, number 13, number 18 when it turned up, and occasionally number 14. And that was just effects. The effects that I produced out of there went to mixing desks downstairs where they added the commentary for those particular areas, and the production people were in there doing the coverage. So there was a sound supervisor downstairs adding the commentary to whatever I was producing effects-wise. And they were very simple, straightforward, bit of audience, 2 mics on the chair. When it came to centre court, that's a whole different thing, because it's a well-known arena. The crowd there is wonderful. The effects are terrific, especially in a really heavy match, with a lot of excitement and stuff like that. And what you have to get across to anyone watching at home is that excitement, that the feeling of that court. Everybody talks about how wonderful the feeling is in centre court. That's what you're trying to put across. That's probably one of the most difficult things to do. There are certain ways to do it. What you don't want in a place like that, what you don't want ever in tennis, is to hear double hits. Somebody hitting a ball the far end, being picked up on the near mics, so you get pop up, and that carries on all the way through, and you go, "Oh no, that's horrible. You don't want to hear that." And it can be quite confusing as well. Did that guy hit it twice? All that sort of stuff. And I worked out a system in centre court where you didn't get that. Pretty much, it disappeared pretty much. But at the same time, getting the effects of the crowd and all that excitement. It was a standard 2 mics on the chair, which eventually I didn't use very often, apart from maybe when the players were at the chair, doing their, wiping themselves down or having a drink or whatever. And at the near end, you'd have a stereo mic looking down the court, and at the far end, you have a similar pair looking back up. I always used to use an M&S setup. So you've got a mic actually looking out, a proper microphone looking up the pitch or down the pitch. And I found that very valuable. Also, the far end, all you're really interested at the far end is the effect of somebody running up and down trying to get the ball, as well as a hit. So you tend to drop that microphone down, which of course helps get rid of double hits to a degree. At the near end, you're basically looking straight down. You've got all the effect of somebody running backwards and forwards. And when it comes to surround, I then put another mic within the windshield that I was using. So it became an M&S looking out onto the court and an M&S looking back into the crowd, but in the same windshield, if you like. And that worked really well. Now, to smooth it out, I'd also have a stereo mic up in the gods above the crowd, but that was just really to sort of give a little distance to the crowd as well as the close-up stuff. And that was basically the way I did Wimbledon from way back, because it's a matter of sitting and listening to what you're covering. And I'd actually sat in courts listening to tennis before now, or before then, and listened to what was going on. And that's how you get what you hear, and you go, how can I cover that? And that's how you develop something, and that's how I developed the system that I used.
How much do you think, when you're looking at or listening to this, I'm thinking you've got mic placement decisions to make. You've got which, like you're saying, whether you use an MS pair, or even a longer shotgun mic, or what you're putting up in the crowd. How, this seems like an iterative process where you try something and you go, ooh, that sounds good. And then is it you say, how do I make that better immediately? Or is this like each year you're adding, okay, let me test this one little thing out this year to see if I can make it better? Kind of what's the cycle of the improvement on this? Or you found the perfect sweet spot and you said, that's it, don't touch
it. Basically, it was fairly straightforward doing mono, doing stereo. Mono. What's mono? Doing stereo. That was fairly straightforward because the only place you could sensibly put a microphone was where you'd actually put the mono microphones for the main coverage of the court. Plus the two mics on the chair. That was basically a mono setup. Well, I kept the mics on the chair because they were useful, especially the further one, in case you wanted to drag up somebody hitting a ball at the far end for a particular reason, whatever, or there was chat or whatever. When it came to stereo, obviously, M&S was the way to go. And that was very straightforward, to be honest. So that presented itself pretty quickly. It was a matter of thinking about the far end, what you do with the far end, getting rid of any double hits, all that sort of stuff. What can I do with the chair mics, which we used to use most of the time? Now their usefulness is reduced, but what can I use them for? How much of the umpire with on PA do I want to have? very quickly that sort of sorts itself out. So that's quite quick. When it came to surround, well, that's a different story, because I wasn't allowed to do surround by my boss at the time. I was asked to do a drama by a producer who was very into audio, and I went to my boss and said, "This producer would like to do a surround version of this drama. Can I do it?" And he said, "No, you can't, because the BBC can't be seen to be promoting or using equipment by a named company, Dolby." So I thought, oh, that's a shame. And then I thought, well, how can I get around the problem? I really want to do surround. I was very impressed by a demo that I'd had some years before um, of an ambisonics recording. And I thought, how exciting it could be to have surround in Wimbledon. That crowd is brilliant. How really lovely it would be to actually have that for people to listen to. Oh, right. Well, how can I get around this problem? And it just so happened that I was in charge of the stores at Kendall Avenue, which is the OB base. And I was given the job of sorting out some of the sound equipment. And I was digging through stuff and discovered there was a Dolby B encoder and decoder. Ah, right. So I went down my next Wimbledon with this stuff. I screwed a couple of speakers on the roof of the scanner behind me, plugged up the gear, worked out how to encode. I thought you just encode the crowd. Don't do the playing area or the commentary or anything like that, because you've got the steering effect that you can get in Dolby B, which might be a problem, especially if loud noises or whatever, especially if you've got two commentators and one suddenly shouts and it can steer. So I thought, well, the way to do it is to actually get the effects through Dolby B and feed it back into the desk and then add commentary to it. And it worked. And a colleague of mine that was working with me on Centre Court had a Dolby decoder at home. So he used to go home and listen to the replays in the evening, and come back the next day, and we'd have a chat about how I could improve things. And we did that for several years. And when the BBC eventually said, yeah, we can do surround, well, I was ahead of the game slightly. But what was quite amusing was I was asked to go and give a lecture at the EBU about surround sound in television. And I did this lecture. And afterwards, two Australian guys who were sound mixers came up to me and said, we've been enjoying your surround sound for years. Apparently they had a setup in wherever they were from, Melbourne or somewhere. So they'd been listening to it. Of course, nobody in the UK knew because it wasn't obvious, apart from the one guy who was going home. Well, a couple of other guys knew, but yeah. So that's how I sort of managed to start, and then it became a reality, and we could do surround properly. And that was great as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, that was another one of those doors you pushed to see how far it would open.
Well, if you don't try stuff, it's like living,
Yeah, that is true. That is true. You make none of the shots you don't take.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I like as you're talking about the surround and even the hand gestures of, we talk about how you get what's in play up and kind of what's not in play I don't want to say down, but at the right level.
Yeah.
And I think we saw this during the pandemic, especially in the football, where there weren't crowds allowed in the stadiums.
Yeah.
And with some of the broadcasts, they would feed out crowd noise, um, to kind of compensate, because it just sounded weird there being no crowd noise. So it's interesting, because knowing that football pitches have, anywhere from 12, 13 to 15 mics around, I know we've talked about this. There's a way to do it where you lift that up, as opposed to, you see all these mics around, and are you really getting all of the field of play you can capture? So can you kind of talk through a little bit of that, how you get the best field of play audio, given that you've got a bunch of mics around there? And this includes not only football, but we talked about Formula One, and bringing what you would naturally hear there closer to the broadcast audience.
The way I was told to do it, when I first started doing footy, was with subtlety, if you like. It's a noise you don't often hear live. If you're actually at a football match, you can hear the football being kicked, but sometimes the crowd's so loud you can't. What you can't do as a broadcaster is make your eyes water because it's so loud. So it's got to be done with some subtlety and balanced against the crowd noise. But what is the point of having all those microphones around a pitch if you don't use them, if you can't hear people kicking your ball all the way round a pitch? Some broadcasts that I've heard in recent times, you never hear anyone kicking a ball around unless they're near the goal, in which case the guy's using the goal mic, and corner mics, because obviously, and even then, sometimes you don't hear somebody kicking a ball from a corner. I find that very frustrating, because I know how brilliant it can be actually hearing a ball being kicked, even subtly, not making a big thing of it, all the way around a pitch. It just brings the football alive, and that's terrific. And that's the way I think it should be.
It's you mentioned that, because I see, when I listen, again, it's am I listening for sound, or am I just listening to enjoy the game? And when I listen for sound, it is that sometimes where you'll have activity happen in the corner during live play, and you'll hear nothing, but then you will hear the set piece, right? The corner kicks. So as you say, what's happening in that moment where you've got mics and you're missing, stomping feet, football, some banter between the players, whatever they're negatively saying to each other. This is, and again, I know again, as speaking to other frustrated mixers, sometimes there are things sometimes the crowd says where they have to fade down everything so you don't pick that up. But
Absolutely.
yeah, it's interesting as to, depending on the game and the venue and the production team, you can hear kind of how certain teams do it to get a little more out of the field of play than others.
Yeah. I came foul of that once. There was a camera that's usually in the middle, virtually flat on the ground, following the action, with a nice 816 strapped to the side of it. And occasionally they turn and look at the managers, and there was one game when I was quite new to doing this, and it swung around and looked at the camera. Looked at the camera. Looked at the manager, and I'd fade up that microphone just in case he said something. And sure enough, you could hear him shouting something or other, and that was okay. That's fine. Instructions to some player or other, or whatever. And that was fine. Game carried on. Camera swung to look at the manager. They cut up the manager. I faded him up. A bit more shouting. And the director leant forward in his little area, and he looked through the window at me, and he said, "Bill, be careful of him." And I looked through and I went, okay. Next time, oops, he let forth a stream of what we shouldn't have heard. And the director leant forward again. He looked through the window to him and he went, well, that's how you learn. You have to judge.
How hot is this moment getting? And then it's the old sniff test. Yeah,
yeah, that's right.
Smell something coming.
So I overstepped the boundaries then, but yeah.
So I'll ask about one of the things I think we talked about last time, which was right before you kind of unofficially retired, but then officially retired, which was some international track and field events. So is there a particular event or kind of broadcast activity that you think is extremely difficult to either mic up or mix or get good audio for? And is there one that is the simplest piece of cake in terms of it sounds great and you don't have to do that much to get the great sound?
Yeah. With me, it was trial and error for something like throwing a discus or throwing a hammer. Do you put the microphone in front or do you stick something behind where maybe with the discus, the guy is actually shouting forwards when he lets go, if you like. But if you've got the microphone behind him, you don't hear that as well. You can hear it, but you don't hear it as well. And the same with the guy swirling the old hammer around and letting fly. They don't like it stuck right in front of them. It's a distraction. So you have to think about that, and basically off at the front but to one side seems to work quite well. Javelin is interesting because what do you go for? Do you go for the person going, "Ugh," when they're throwing it? Or do you want to hear the landing? Because generally when you've done the chuck, you cut to the wide shot and see it into the ground. Now, does that make a noise or what? Well, my very first athletics that I did, I was given a microphone and told to go and cover the javelin. So I wandered off with my microphone on a long lead, and I stood there and somebody threw the javelin and we heard it land. Same again, we heard it land. The guy came on talkback and he said, "Bill, where are you standing?" And I said, "I'm standing where the javelins land." He said, "Do you really think you ought to be there?" And I said, "Yeah, I can see it coming." You know, he said, "Go and cover the chuck." So I did. So that was another learning curve.
I
Don't
can
stand where
imagine
the javelin lands.
Well, I was going to say, I can imagine the just this folly of someone just, no, need a bit closer, and just keep taking steps out.
Anyway, as far as difficulty is concerned, pretty much, um, I think most things. I don't know if my colleagues agree. Most things are fairly straightforward to mic up if you think about it. Where to put the stuff that's interesting. If you've got something like a long jump, what I like to hear is the run up, the thump as the guy takes off, and also the landing in the pit. So you've got two microphones on that, one pointing down the run up and the jump, and then the other one pointing across at the sand where they actually fall in. Other people don't bother with that, but that's what I used to like. And that was by going and standing there and listening to it and going, oh, yeah, that's interesting. Have a bit of that and a bit of that. What can be difficult?
A question on that I'd ask is the actual mic itself. So are you putting a wider pickup on
2 4-1-6s?
Okay.
4-1-6s and 8-1-6s tend to be the standard stuff that you use for that sort
it's in the truck and
coverage. Yeah. I know people who've tried to use other flat mics, not on the stand, just lying by the side. That's okay if it's not raining. So something in a decent windshield. That's what you want. What can be difficult are things like 100 meters hurdles, because what you try and do is put a microphone on each hurdle. 100 meters happens very quickly, so if you're trying to mix it, it's fairly useless. I tried that a few times and thought, no, that's fairly useless. What you want is a decent start, a bit of the first couple maybe, and then by then they've cut to a camera looking from the stand down onto the general stuff. So you just want the end.
Yeah, I'm thinking the rugby touchline runner with the 816 on the 100 meter.
Absolutely.
It's like,
yeah,
get somebody
brilliant.
fast enough to run. Yeah.
I've done it. Yeah, and it's difficult with the cable attached, which is the way I had to do it when I did it. What is wonderful about the coverage on rugby, which you can't honestly do on football, is the fact that the umpire, or the referee in that case, wears a microphone, whereas a radio mic you can hear what he's saying all the time. That's brilliant because it's so instructive, and it boosts the coverage immensely. If only you could do that in football, but you don't.
Yep.
For the same reason that I didn't play that the manager.
That is true. It's the gentlemanly sport, but it is having done a lot of obviously watching rugby, but speaking on that whole segment with the audio side, it's like the referee is the director of the match.
Yeah.
And hearing that direction just adds that to the whole game.
And there's no argument.
Yeah.
If he says A is A, A is A, there's no comeback. And football, argument. No, awful. Could be fun to fade it up, but no.
Yeah. not safe for broadcast.
Not really. Yeah. But yeah, in general, athletics, I have always found to be much pleasant to do. I've generally done the track stuff, and the field stuff has generally been done by other people. I have done both, but I prefer to do track. So we have two scanners one doing track, one doing the field events, and I just enjoy the excitement of the running, really. and it's quite fun. Quite fun.
So that being one of your last big events, I'll ask now what to kind of come full circle on what you did before you got into the broadcast side of the world and were into the music side to some of your more recent activities and projects that you're doing now. So what are you working on now, Bill?
I sing in a choir, gravelly bass, and I've been writing quite a lot of music. I started writing music quite a way back, when I had my bedsit, actually. Me and my guitar, and I had an Akai tape machine, which I spent an awful lot of money on at the time. Well, it was an awful lot of money at the time. We're talking back in 1968, something like that. And I had learnt how to double track on it, so I could actually play guitar. I could play guitar and sing at the same time, but I could also separate out the playing and then sing on top of it. But my favourite thing to do was to actually, because I bought a Roland guitar synth, and a wonderful echo machine from Roland, and I used to use those two to make quite well what I thought was quite interesting noises. And when I joined the Beeb, funnily enough, I was very much into pop music, which is why I landed on my feet when I joined a crew that was doing Top of the Pops. That was absolutely brilliant as far as I was concerned. A couple of years after that, I happened to be involved in a program which was 3 days of orchestral music. The premise was that they started off with a Mozart-sized orchestra, and then they moved on to something slightly bigger, and then it ended up with a very big symphony orchestra in the what was the biggest studio the BBC had, TC1 they called it. And my job over the 3 days was to act as liaison between the floor and the gallery, the sound gallery. So I sat on a Fisher boom with a long arm and a microphone on the end, with a pair of headphones on, waiting for somebody to chat to me so I could chat back. And if there was any problem with the microphone, nip off, go and fix it, come back. Well, to sit there in front of those orchestras for that 3 days totally screwed up my pop stuff, because I just wanted to write symphony music. I went stupid. So I didn't lose interest in pop music, but I definitely
found a new love.
Yeah, absolutely. And ever since then, I'd sort of tinkered with writing so-called classical music, but that's become more of a thing now, since I now have the time to do it. Last year, I was lucky enough to have 2 pieces played by an orchestra in the Czech Republic, which cost a lot of money, but it was well worth doing. So what to do with them, I've no idea really, but I was given the chance to do it, and I grabbed it with both hands, because those opportunities don't often come by. And it's given me maybe a chance to, because of the people I met, who set up the system and so on and so forth for me to use, perhaps I could go back to them with more pieces and say, I've got this, can we do it again, sort of thing, until I run out of money.
So it's,
that's the problem.
It's yes, this I love the full circleness of that, because this is the I don't want to say failed musician story, but sometimes music doesn't pay the bills and costs more than you
It's very
make.
true.
So chasing a music passion is very expensive.
It is. I have I have four large drawers of CDs upstairs, plus several other caches of CDs elsewhere in the house. There's probably a small fortune stuck in there. Once I discovered all the different types of classical music and other stuff, a load of pop stuff. I've got some lovely LPs down here if anybody wants some vinyl. But yeah, music, as far as I'm concerned.
So
I just love it.
that's your keeping you busy now. Music and
Yeah.
grandkids.
Yeah, two of those. I was very fortunate in part of my career in outside broadcasts to be involved in several years of doing the BBC proms. That's a whole other thing. And that was the transition to stereo, from stereo to surround as well. So there was that side to it. And that was my favorite thing to do. You can keep your football matches and your rugby matches and your cricket and your boxing and running around. The proms I absolutely loved. I thought I was reasonably good at it. There are others that would say, perhaps you're not. But I enjoyed myself as far as it went. Yeah, it was great fun.
Oh, that's
I've had a lovely career, to be honest. I've done all sorts of lovely things.
Well, and in the times that we've talked, I think it suits you, right? It's there's a little bit of variety, there's a little bit of experimentation, innovation, as well as a little bit of rebelliousness happening in that world that all come together for you.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's happened and sometimes it hasn't, but
yeah. As long
I've
as
been
it's
very
happened
lucky.
more times than it hasn't, you're on the winning side.
Oh, it certainly has. Oh, yes. I've really enjoyed myself. Yeah, fun memories.
Well, I will ask you one more question, and thank you for, it's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. My question for you is this: if you could now go back and give younger Bill just starting out, the letter has just been sent off to the Beeb. The sound career is about to start. What advice would you give that younger Bill?
Learn as much as you can from other people who have been doing it a long time, but use your ears and your brain. Go and listen to what you're doing. Go and listen to what it sounds like in reality and see if you can get as close to that. It's not always possible, but as close to that as you can. And if you're doing something like that, try and get the excitement across to people. If you're just starting off, use your ears, get as much information as you can from other people who know what they're doing, and go for it. If you want the job, go for it. I did, and I've enjoyed myself immensely.
That is, I can tell you, again, the fun side of work. It's not. There's a saying that says if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. Well, there's rough days no matter what you do.
There are rough days, oh yes.
But again, it's that's what makes the work fun. If you do
learn from them,
yep.
Learn from them. If you make mistakes, learn.
Yep, definitely. Well, Bill, thank you very much for staying with me for the interview. Wish you all the best. Let's catch up again soon. I need to reach out to Richard too and have a catch up with him sometime. But yeah, all the best, and thank you very much. And we will
thank you.
Chat with you soon enough. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thanks, John. Take care.
Bye-bye.